Welcome to another exciting episode of the Contractor Business Builder podcast. Today we have the honor of having David Lupberger. He's with the Contractor Transition Strategies. Really exciting stuff about what happens after your business and after, your business life. So after decades in the trenches as a high-end remodeler, David realized most contractors build businesses they can't step away from. Till one major realization changed his entire perspective. So 80% of construction businesses simply shut down when their owner retires. So what if that doesn't have to be your fate? Welcome here today, David. How are you doing today?
Thank you. It's such a great topic. So thanks for asking.
It's very, very much looking forward to diving into this. It's something I think a lot of contractors think of, but never really, like as you mentioned earlier, the urgency is never quite there to really plan it out and think that far forward. So can you tell us a little bit about your story, your background, and how that led to helping contractors with that transition?
I sure will. So I'm a former full service building contractor, did it for probably 25 years and still do a number of presentations. I'll be at the International Builder Show, a Journal of Light Construction, a number of association meetings. And as I got older, I began looking at my own transition strategy. And so it became present for me that at some of these association meetings, I began asking to my contractor audience, what are you doing to prepare for your transition? And I never had more than two people raise their hands. And so I'm looking at a room and mostly I'm just looking at blank stares. And so the reality was they're not planning. And that leads back to that statistic. And this actually came from Forbes magazine, that 80% of these service businesses will just close their doors because the owner is the business.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at what you've built, the reputation, the relationships you have, not just with clients, but with trade contractors, with suppliers, your reputation in your community, and the commitment you have to your employees and what they've made to you, which is, can we make this transferable? And the reality is to do that, the owner has to remove themselves from day-to-day operations. It takes time, but it can be done.
Yeah, really the big challenge there, right? The tendency is to be, busy in your business and you're trying to oftentimes either, you got boom or bust and trying to survive and just, make some good money, grow the business. And the challenge is because you're so invested all the time, you're not really thinking about the bigger picture long term. You can get to kind of the end of your career and realize that you still are the very much the cornerstone of your business and it doesn't really function without you. So why do you think so few contractors are prepared for that transition or why, like I think a lot, like I mentioned, I think a lot of them thought about it, but why do you feel like there's so many, like 80% is, the vast majority just never quite get there or realize what they need to do in time?
When I was in the industry, there's very little, if any, industry training on preparing for your business transition. It's all about working in the business. And so this is truly a strategic decision by an owner, which is after doing this for 20, 25, 30 years, I want to make my company transferable for legacy, for the benefit of my employees, for the benefit of clients, and there can be a financial reward. So I just haven't seen the education. So I kind of made a commitment 4 years ago to attend, some of these trainings and became a certified exit planning advisor. And the irony in all this as I sat in these courses is I was the only one that was industry specific. They were financial planners, wealth managers, even insurance agents, and they were adding an element, to their portfolio. Well, look, I understand contracting because I sat where these owners have sat for 25 years. And that's what makes this work is I understand the ups and downs, the roller coaster, the financial aspect, the emotional demands, emotional homeowners, trust me. So I've understood that, but this can be done. And you mentioned preparing for this. And an element of this is, we're talking about planning our future. Another element, what happens if there's an accident or an illness? And so part of this is called continuity planning, which is how do I create some redundancy? So something happened to me. If something happened to a key employee, what have I done to cross-train? Have I identified what skills someone needs? And asking my clients about this, no one to date has had a continuity plan. And you said it, we don't get around to it. This is just, it's strategic business planning. And so long range goal with something happens, let's plan for it. But the longer range goal is how do we make this transferable And how do I remove myself from day-to-day responsibilities?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there is little training or resources and things like this around this topic of preparing for that transition, but also ultimately making the transition and choosing the right steps there. So early on in a conversation with a client, maybe they want to retire in, let's say, 10 years or so. What should they be thinking about, or what are kind of the first steps to wrap their head around where they need to get to?
It's a good question. So I just worked with somebody yesterday. So I like taking a current organizational chart of the company. And in most cases, owners are involved with six, seven, eight different functions. We wear a variety of hats.
Hmm.
So let's just start with picking one or two functions and what can we delegate? All right. And so we can look at the org chart and I could say 6 months from now, if you didn't have to do this, all right, would that lighten your load? And the answer is, of course. Well, let's begin to identify what that position is. Let's create a position description. If you're doing this already, I can work with people then to create a position description. And not only the description of what the responsibilities are, but even some KPIs. How do we measure performance and even onboarding? Because as we look to delegate, who are we delegating it to? So is it in-house? If it's in-house, I may recommend doing an employee assessment. And there's some wonderful assessment tools. Is the
Hmm.
person really qualified? Do they have not only the qualitative skills, but the integrity, the transparency. Are these people really matching and working within the core values of the company? And so you can do that within an employee, with a in-house employee, or you can do it as you begin searching for somebody. So part of this is just begin to delegate. What can we delegate in a prioritized fashion? And if
Hmm.
I did that with one function in the first 6 months, can I do it with another function in the next 6 months? And now, could this be done faster? Of course it can, but you just said it. All these guys are running businesses. They're working very hard in the business. So let's just begin to create a prioritized delegation plan. Because literally within, 2 to 3 years, you could truly be in a management role. And then you're looking at what are the different sales scenarios? What's possible?
Yeah, I like how very structured and getting that organization chart in place, even if the owner is filling a majority of the roles, it at least that visual representation and structure, I think it often really clarifies like, oh, I'm actually, doing this role and this role and this role. And it starts to compartmentalize and then you can focus and work on one step at a time. I think that's where a lot of people kind of go astray as well, is they want to build some organization or consistency systems, whatever, and they kind of start picking this and that and the other thing, and it's just kind of gets spread out and
Yep.
lost in the wind, if you will,
Yep.
instead of really honing in on specifically, what am I going to work on, this 6 months and then after that and prioritizing. So yeah, really important there. So you've compared custom remodeling to elective surgery, I believe.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you unpack that analogy and like what that means exactly?
Yeah. So I've been through 3 joint replacements. All right. One knee and 2 hips. And they've been life changing because I can now do everything I used to do. And guess what? Things wear out. Well,
Hmm.
when you're entering a surgical scenario, will it work? There's a lot of uncertainty because, I mean, this is your body.
Hmm.
Did I pick the right surgeon and what's the outcome? Now let's compare that to customer modeling. A person's living with a situation, there's some kind of pain because their home is not really giving them what they want. So they begin this unusual path of beginning this major change to their household. The outcome is uncertain before they start. They hope they've picked the right surgeon. And so there's this level of an emotional uncertainty. And so our job is really to acknowledge that uncertainty because there's a lot of fear. And if people haven't been through this before, guess what? There's numerous stories about remodel projects gone bad. So let's replace those stories by guiding people through this. And a good physician does what a good contractor does. Let me help you understand every step in the process. I will meet with you weekly or bi-weekly with progress meetings. You'll have information that you'll help understand. And there really is a parallel to elective surgery. We're just doing elective surgery on their home, but there still is that emotional undercurrent of, I hope this goes as we want. And until you've gone through it, you're not sure. So I've said to some of the people I work with, managing that experience can be more important than managing the project.
Hmm.
You're always managing the project, but let's focus on the client and how do we guide them through this surgery? It just happens to be on their home.
Yeah, like that distinction between the project and the client. I think majority of remodelers, contractors, they want to provide a great experience. They want to go that extra mile for the client, but often that gets all that energy gets funneled into I want to like managing the project well, which is important, obviously. But there's the client management side of setting expectations and having communication with them, providing resources or what have you, as well as solving first problems first when someone comes to you, you think their problem is they want to update their home or whatever. But the first problem may just be for them to get comfortable and trust you because they've heard these stories before or what have you. And you need to be able to educate them and relieve some of that risk or uncertainty that they have around, moving forward with this,
Mhm.
elective surgery on their home, as you put it.
Yeah, yeah.
So before you gave us a nice outline of how to sort of structure the business and work on, getting some process and delegation in place to facilitate a future transition. Can you talk a bit more specifically about what systems you see as most critical for an owner to actually kind of get out of that day to day and be in a position to sell their business or start thinking about selling their business?
Certainly the main thing, and we started this with my client yesterday,
Mhm.
is documented position descriptions. And I'll ask again and again, do your employees know what they're responsible for? And in most cases, well, they've worked with me for 3 years or 4 years or 6 years or 8 years. Yeah, they know
Mhm.
their job. Is it in writing? Because what I want to do then is every position within a company documented. We could call it position description. It's a position agreement. I put my expectations in writing because if I'm not there and another owner in some capacity is stepping in, does everyone in the company have a very clear vision of what they're responsible for within the total company operations? Secondly, are there performance metrics? Because how do we measure someone's performance and are they exceeding those expectations? And so we come back then to a format of doing employee evaluations, ideally integrated before any sale, so that employees, they must be accountable for their
Mhm.
role. And then lastly, I love putting in onboarding because if we look at employees potentially leaving, new employees coming in, then I want the new employee to see that documented job description. All right. I want them to see the performance metrics. But I also say if somebody's coming in, that position description, that agreement, you'll be fully functioning perhaps a year from now. But you've got to learn company operations, company processes, and really integrate within our operation. So let's break that down into bite-sized pieces. What can we do in month one when you start? And what am I checking in on at the end of 30 days? What do we do in month two, month three? So it identifies a training curriculum. And we begin to identify what will the owner be doing? What might the office manager be doing in regards to technology, in regards to data entry? What might another lead carpenter do to train a potential project manager? So it helps me identify what's the training curriculum and who can do the training. And then if I'm with somebody new, they're looking at this outline, we know where we're going. And so it's really no different from a building plan. You don't approach any project without putting a plan on the paper because then a homeowner, there's a meeting of the minds. Yes, I understand what you're going to do. No different with an employee. Let's come to an agreement of what these expectations are. And then in a very proactive company, maybe every 6 months, certainly no more than 12 months, you're checking in. Can we improve this? All right. What are we doing? What feedback do you have? And then the feedback coming back to the owner, what can I do better? And, this is now the culture of a company that I think people want to stay in because it's highly interactive. People are participating, they have a voice, and everybody benefits. All right. And so we're moving away from this, leader at the top to much more of an integrated community. And that's what people want. They want to be part of something that works. And so that whole interaction begins creating a community of people who work together.
I like that analogy, if you will, of a community at work because that kind of translates into culture is what a lot of people say, but even culture is sort of kind of the feeling, but I feel like the community is the people and connection that they
Yeah.
have with the
Yeah.
business and that onboarding process. There's so many benefits to it from the employee getting a professional experience coming in that
Yeah.
they feel like, hey, there is some structure here. They do understand their role. They understand that there is this pathway that if they stay with the company, they will receive, this certain training or certain, there's a future for them at the company as well.
Yeah.
Instead of just kind of throwing them on site, there's the foreman, go talk to him and do whatever he says. And, and then people kind of wonder why they have turnover of employees and things like that. And so there's huge benefits across the board there. Plus, with a good onboarding process, it just gets the employee up to speed so much quicker that they're going to be more efficient, better performance, better trained, everything in a much shorter period of time. Can you dive into a little bit about the performance, measuring performance, I guess, of employees? I feel like this is something that's not often done well or much at all at construction companies. And there's quite a bit of gray area there as far as,
How to do it?
what do you measure? How do you do a performance review without making the employee feel like they're under this tremendous pressure? Or, how do you incorporate that into a business?
It's a really simple format. So we've created a position description, and here are 10 or 12 primary responsibilities. And we can identify, what those are. I can either do it if I'm an owner that I'm delegating, or I can speak to a good employee, and we can identify those 10 or 12 primary responsibilities. Now let's take each one of those responsibilities and on the right-hand side, put a 1 to 5 rating. And so if I'm bringing in somebody new and I've got an onboarding plan, and maybe we're focusing on 4 functions within month 1, I'm doing a 30-day check-in looking at those 4 functions. And I'm asking the employee, rate your understanding of these 4 functions that you've been onboarded on a 1 to 5 basis, 1 being, man, I need help, 5 being, I got it. And then I want the direct superintendent to do the same thing. I want them to rate the employee. So we're looking at those 4 items. We put those 2 sheets next to each other. If the scores don't match, then they need more training or they're not doing what you've asked. So here's the position description. They understand. Now let's evaluate performance. Let's do it from the employee's perspective and the superintendent. Now that's just the onboarding. Now let's go to an existing employee. I can do the exact same thing. Sit down, semi-annual, no more than annually. Employees appreciate these kind of evaluations. And let's check in. And they're scoring themselves, but then the owner or direct supervisor is scoring them. And this is where we're creating accountability. And if I gave somebody a 3, this won't be a surprise, because if there's truly been, events during the course of the year, maybe they're not uploading, the information to Co-Construct or Builder Trend. They're not taking the photos. They're not finishing time cards. There might be a technical aspect, an admin aspect of this. You need to focus on this. This is part of your job. Getting a material list in on Friday for the following week. The things that a project manager does, it's not just being on site. So if you're managing, are you truly managing the entire job? And if there's a weakness, and I really like doing a 6-month check-in, if there's a weakness, this isn't a test. It really is saying, how do I help you improve? If there's been a weakness here, if there's been a lack of performance, you're frustrated, I'm probably frustrated. How do we fix it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So it becomes a communication tool. Instead of somebody saying they're just not doing their job. Well, wait a minute. Have you outlined what they're responsible for, number 1? And number 2, are you checking in, which is, do they have the tools? Do they have the understanding to do what you've asked them to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be perfectly honest, I've had more than one owner say, I've hired somebody, but I was so busy. It's like throwing them into the deep end of the pool, which is, here's your job, please do it. Well, you can see all the elements that have not been communicated. All right. And it all comes back to communication. So I always start with that job description. I'll review this with a current or future employee. Do you understand each one of these things? Here are my expectations. Would you change any of this? Would you add anything? We come to an agreement and they sign. And I sign at the bottom of the position agreement. When somebody signs, they're saying, I understand and I agree. So 6 months from now, you're reviewing a particular task and perhaps their performance could be better. They can't say, I didn't understand. No, we reviewed this 6 months ago. There's your signature. And again, it's not a test. This is, how do I help you improve? Because when you improve, the company benefit. Do you need more training? Do you need more tools? And again, all I'm looking for is an opportunity to communicate that path to success, help make them better. And you mentioned, this could be a nice career track for the right person. And the mentoring happens in the company of a good production manager, of a good lead carpenter, training somebody to be more effective. And it is almost like an apprenticeship, which is you're working with somebody who's more experienced, and that more experienced person begin to share that experience to the benefit of everyone.
Yeah. Thanks for detailing that out. great approach. I like how you have, both the supervisor and the employee kind of rating themselves to see how it matches. So that, I think that in and of itself really either shows alignment or misalignment, and kind of
That's it.
figuring out that portion of it. And then, yeah, having that communication that this isn't a test, this isn't to, hold this over your head if you haven't, lived up to some standard, but that we are looking to reach certain standards, and we want to help improve, like through whatever, means that we can help, and help you, be better at your job and things like that. So you've talked about the silver tsunami. Can you explain what that is, and what the challenges and opportunities are for that?
Yeah, the silver tsunami. It's all the boomers, and I forget, the age, but it's people like me.
Hmm.
And the baby boomers were the largest generation. And to make a long story short, we're all in our 60s and early 70s. And this is
Hmm.
what came from Forbes magazine. There'll be over 250,000 businesses for sale by 2030. And these are all experienced, business 20, 30, 40 years. And the startling point from Forbes magazine you'd mentioned earlier, 80% of those businesses will just close their doors. Once again, because the owner is the business. And you can see it. Small service business, painting company, plumbing company, contracting company. All right. And what is it? Over 90% of companies in the United States do under 5 million in annual revenue. So that's the whole service element.
Hmm.
And so that became kind of my focus, which is I don't want to see all that talent go away. And the owners don't either,
Hmm.
but they need a path to begin to understand what's possible because these businesses are quote unquote smaller. You don't
Hmm.
have private equity firms coming in to buy this. You don't have consolidation. Now there's some going on like in plumbing and maybe HVAC where
Hmm.
they're buying these small service companies and trying to aggregate them. I can't see it happening in remodeling because the systems are more sophisticated. You can bring in an outside system to a plumbing company, to an HVAC company. So
Hmm.
number one, the remodeling companies, the systems are very unique, but they're also really part of the community. So we've tried some consolidation before, and the accounting systems were all different. The production systems. Remember, we've grown this from birth, so we've created these things. So as an owner looks to begin transferring the company, who's your market? And theoretically, well, I'll sell it. Well, who are you going to sell it to? All right.
Hmm.
There could be a strategic partner, another company who somebody in your area that'd like to grow your friends, oftentimes, because I've seen this in the past, and they assume the company. The biggest issue there is money, is what could you be paid? And secondly, is company culture, is will that new owner maintain the company culture that you've grown so carefully? And it's any of these small businesses, they really are extended families. So then a more warmer scenario is selling to a key employee. Now the only problem is they don't have the money, but they certainly understand all the operations. So you can set up a system where you begin creating a performance bonus system, whereas you allocate or delegate certain responsibilities, and they're responsible for growing revenue. And again, you can lay this out. Any owner knows there's opportunities to grow.
Hmm.
Most owners, they're not trying to grow anymore. But can I find an ambitious employee who has the same fire in his belly that I did 30 years ago, 20 years ago, that sees this opportunity? And
Hmm.
I assist them through my mentoring on taking ownership, getting performance bonuses that then can turn into future stock and then create the basis for a sale.
Hmm.
So you can see there are a lot of moving pieces, but it's
Yep.
how you can reward a key person and setting up a 3 to 5 year transition plan. And the last one I've been really intrigued about, it's the employee owned cooperative, where
Hmm.
literally you can create a cooperative to sell to a group of current employees. And there is guidance on how to do this for the first time, probably in their career. They have an opportunity then to get an ownership share. And,
Hmm.
there are a lot of, it's a legal setup, it's not an ESOP. It's not an employee owned stock option program because those are for companies over 10 million. And there's a lot of legal and tax requirements. An employee owned cooperative is different, can be done for as little as 3 people. And so I just want people to understand there are options, as you begin looking at what's your situation, when's your potential transition time, is it 3 years, 5 years? I spoke with somebody 18 months yesterday and I said, we got to get on it. All right, because it takes time. And
Hmm.
then looking at, what are the options and how do I implement this? Who might be interested? So now we're working on the business. And that's the point I'm trying to get people to do is
Yep.
what is this plan? How do we get there? And guess what? It's a building plan. It just
Mhm.
happens to be for your business.
Yeah, lots of clarifying there and options, as you mentioned, to sell a business. And one of the reasons to reach out to someone like yourself who understands the different options, because it's not just a matter of, putting it up for sale like a house and everything like that. I mean, there's business brokers and things out there, but there's more than just kind of open market sales in a lot of these smaller businesses. As you mentioned, remodeling, general contracting, it is quite unique and it's not as straightforward, I would imagine, as like a trades business, like plumbing, HVAC is a little bit more repetitive style of service, whereas remodeling, I mean, it's quite varied and the structures can be quite different as well. Can you walk us through a client you've worked with and maybe sort of where they started, some of the things you've implemented and what the outcomes were?
Yeah, so a gentleman here in Colorado. So we probably started 4.5 years ago, and it was really assisting him on business improvement. And he had had a past person that he had tried to sell the company to, and it turns out the person wasn't honest. And when he took the company back, he was about two or three hundred thousand dollars in debt. Now he was really focused, and so he has turned the business operations around. Stepped back in, brought in new employees, documented job descriptions, and he's actually a structural engineer, so building contractor, but really understands and does large structural remodels, and has put
Mhm.
together the team to do that. So like 2.5 years ago, he put the company up for sale through a sales broker, and there wasn't much activity. And then I brought to him the employee-owned cooperative, and he looked at it, and he took his company off the market and put him in contact with a gentleman that I work with that oversees the implementation of the employee-owned cooperative, and he closed the sale in April.
Nice.
And
Mhm.
so he is now, and he's financing. In this case, he's financing it. Now there are options. These are, part of all these various elements, but he's financing it. So he's created an annuity. And for many people, he gets to stay involved for at least the next 2 years, but he's reducing the demands on him. And he really is that master salesperson, as many owners are. But we're looking now at the opportunity to take a designer and his estimator and create a sales team. And
Mhm.
so there's some wonderful creative elements to this, which is how do we do this? Who could be involved? And we've done employee assessments on each person in the company. Are they in the right seat? But I'd actually just spoke with him on Wednesday, and there are 10 people in the company, and seven have bought into the cooperative. And
Okay.
so there were three. Again, it's an option, and you set a share price, and so 7 out of the 10 have bought in, and he anticipates the others will, and I think they're waiting to see how it works.
Mhm.
So that's a nice scenario because he really got what he was looking for, and the employees who couldn't do what he's done, they're
Mhm.
now getting the benefit, or the foundation's in place. He's done the heavy lifting,
Yep.
and now they get the benefit. And because of the work that he does, the structural additions,
Mhm.
his work hasn't slowed down. I mean, he's in a good niche. So we come back to, is your company in a productive niche? Is there an opportunity to grow? And in many cases, there is if you're good at what you do.
Great to hear that, and really win-win across the
Yeah,
board there for
that's it.
everybody. And yeah, fantastic to see that achievable. You mentioned that you originally had sold to an employee, didn't work out.
Yeah.
If someone's thinking of that route instead of a cooperative and they maybe have, a general manager or a very, kind of senior manager that's thinking of purchasing business, how would you like advise or some
Right.
things that they should be looking at if it's more specifically, for somebody they know? It could even be a family member or something like
Yeah.
that. What
Yeah.
what does that look like?
Great question. And the reality is, owners have learned to live with risk, and they've been through numerous markets and living with risk because sales are dependent on you in most cases. The economy you don't control. There are good years, there can be some challenging years. So, what I'm looking to do if I have a good employee, I'll begin that delegation process and I'll begin looking at what I'm doing as an owner. And let me take either a lead carpenter or a production manager and begin delegating general manager responsibilities. So in the first 6 months, let me allocate these additional responsibilities. The next 6 months, let me allocate more. And there can be some compensation related to that. What I'm doing here is almost creating a vesting program, which is I'm going to start giving you additional responsibilities. And I want to see you step up with initiative to assume these responsibilities. Now, what this gets into is every owner knows I don't work 8 to 5, Monday to Friday. All right. We as owners, we may be working in the evening. We may work on a weekend because it's what's required. So as I get into this vesting idea, we get to see if the person is stepping into the role, has the initiative and the drive. And in about half the cases that I've worked with, the prospective employee wasn't a good fit, all right, for a variety of reasons. But that's why I want that 24-month period minimum. Are they stepping up? I'm not transferring any stock, all right? I might be giving a bonus. The bonus, instead of converting to stock, it's in an escrow account because it's there to purchase. But I want that employee to show me they have the capacity and the drive. And you'll just see, and my experience is about 90% of workers don't have that owner capacity of basically taking on risk. Because guess what? It goes to your family. And when I'm working for myself, and again, if you're entrepreneurial, this is creative. This is part of the job. Not everybody's geared to do this. So let me create an opportunity for a person to step up and see, because it could be, and I've heard this many times, no, they really like being their role in the company and they're not really suited as an ownership role. Well, great. Now I found out. All right. So I didn't try to hire the wrong person. They've demonstrated what they're good at. We understand their commitment. Now let me look elsewhere.
Yeah.
But I want that vesting period.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to kind of, vest, try, see both sides for the owner to know if this is the right, person that's going to be able to guide the business forward. And then for the person stepping into the role, they could be a really competent manager and a wonderful general manager, but like you said, being able to have the creative capacity, if you will, to mitigate risk, to lead people, to see the
Yep.
bigger picture and grow a business. That's a very unique set of skills
Yes, exactly.
that entrepreneurs are kind of tested by fire every day on a
Yes,
lot of
you
that
are.
stuff, and
Yeah.
it can be stressful, and you got to learn a lot really fast sometimes. So yeah, nice way to see if that person's right, and give them the room to succeed instead of just maybe handing it off and expecting them to sink or swim, as you mentioned before, sometimes with throwing them in the deep end.
Yeah.
So that there's that warm up period to see if it's
Yeah.
going to work out or not.
Yeah.
So
For both of you.
yeah, fantastic. So David, the if people wanting to reach out to you, we'll put a link to your website in the description of this video or audio, depending where you're watching or listening. What's the best way for people to learn more about you, what you do, connect with you? How should they go about doing that?
So on the Contractor Transition Strategies website, if you're interested, I've got some neat little tools, and one is an exit readiness assessment, and it reviews every element in a business and it shows your level of involvement. So that's a great starting point. Again, contractortransitionstrategies.com. My email is just my name, David at davidlupberger.com. But all this just starts with a conversation. And where are people at? What are they thinking? And then I get to ask questions. Timetable. What do you want? What are your options? Financial need. And and I'll tell people right in the beginning, we're probably looking at a 3 to 5 year transition strategy, transition plan.
Yep.
And some people listen and saying, I don't want to wait that long.
Mm.
Now, the couple yesterday, now there's some things that are already in place, but she told me 18 months. And I said, this is going to be a sprint. She said, we're ready. So part of what then I get to hold them accountable, because as we move through this, then I have certain exercises and deadlines. So I'm their production coordinator in this respect. But it's a wonderfully creative conversation. Where do people want this to go? What are the options? How's it financed? Who can benefit? And analogy, the win-win, through the either to a key employee or the cooperative.
Mhm.
And you've built this thing, and there's value in all those relationships. I don't want those to go away.
Mhm. Definitely great. So yeah, go check out the resource, do the readiness quiz to see where things are at. We'll put the link to that specific quiz as well as the website in the description. So go reach out to David here. We definitely want to have this plan in place. No matter where you're at, start with the end in mind. I think is the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. I can't remember the author's name right at this moment, but start with the end in mind, and you need that direction. And even if it's not, in the card at this point, it's good to know ahead of time so you can start planning for it in the future. So, any final words of wisdom or final topic you wanted to touch on, David?
Well, you just said it. You build with the end in mind.
Hmm.
And remember Michael Gerber, he wrote the book, The E-Myth?
Hmm.
I listened to an interview that he did, and somebody asked him, "What do you see in the most successful companies you've worked with?" And I've always remembered he said they started the company with the end in mind. They knew it was to produce a certain outcome. And so you just said it, take your company now and where do you want to go? And it's a building plan. So do building plans change? Of course. All right. But until we start some direction, then even the idea starts creating some momentum. So if we can create the idea, let's begin filling in the gaps. What's possible instead of just a random thought now becomes possible. And then that's what are the pieces to get there.
Perfect. Thanks, David, for helping us, think bigger and coming on, sharing your insights today. Really appreciate you sharing with us.
Thank you for inviting me on. It's a great topic.